peaceful suburb in Atlanta turns into a scene of nightmares. It was the summer of 1998, and life in the southern suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia was the epitome of small-town charm. Neat rows of two-story homes line the quiet streets, complete with manicured lawns, striped awnings, and American flags fluttering in the hot breeze. The hum of lawnmowers on the weekends mingled with the shouts of children chasing after ice cream trucks. Families spent Saturday afternoons grilling in their backyards or lounging by neighborhood pools, soaking in the comfort of a community that felt untouched by the chaos of the outside world. There were good schools, steady jobs, and an unspoken trust among neighbors. This was the perfect place to raise a family, or so everyone thought. But as the sun began to set on this picturesque slice of Americana, shadows were already looming, shadows that no one knew existed until it was too late. The first murder caused a ripple, but by the time the third family was found dead, it sent shockwaves through the community. What was once a serene neighborhood filled with life had suddenly become a hunting ground. People stopped leaving their doors unlocked, a practice many had held onto despite the changing times. The pleasant chit-chat between neighbors shifted into nervous whispers, and porch lights, which used to lull the streets into a gentle evening glow, now stayed on all night, casting unsettling shadows across front lawns. Detective Lee Carter from the Atlanta Metropolitan Police Department vividly remembers receiving the first call. A young dispatcher's voice trembled as they described the scene. The Johnson family, a staple of the community, had been discovered brutally murdered in their own home. No signs of forced entry, no immediate motive, just death. A death so senseless, so cruel, that it felt like fiction. Carter, a veteran of 2 decades who thought he'd seen it all, instantly had a gnawing feeling this wouldn't be an isolated incident. "This isn't just a random break-in gone wrong," he had muttered to his rookie partner. "People don't kill like this by accident." And he was right. By the end of 1998, the Atlanta suburb slaughter, as the media dubbed it, had claimed 16 lives. This was no ordinary criminal spree. These weren't homes targeted for their wealth or valuables. These were families annihilated, down to the last member, in what seemed to be carefully staged acts of violence. The local press ran front-page stories of emptied neighborhoods, their headlines dripping with sensationalism. "Who's next? A killer in our midst," and "Suburban bliss shattered by bloodshed." To the outside world, Atlanta's suburban outskirts now had a terrifying reputation. The kind of place where strangers turned their heads too quickly, and safe was nothing but a distant memory. Parents pulled their kids from sleepovers, communities organized neighborhood watches, and sales of home security systems skyrocketed. Yet despite the fear that gripped the suburbs like a choking ivy, no one knew exactly who, or even what, they should be afraid of. Each family that fell victim left behind an eerie set of unanswered questions. Who could do something so horrifying, and why? The answers seemed maddeningly out of reach. Residents reported feeling like they were being watched, though no solid suspects ever emerged. Some spoke of strange cars idling too long at curbs, others of unusual noises in the dead of night, like footsteps across gravel or faint whispers carried on the wind. "It might just be my imagination," one neighbor said during an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, "but it feels like whoever is doing this enjoys scaring us just as much as killing." Detectives leaned heavily into profiling. Was the killer or killers motivated by pure sadism, a twisted vendetta, or was this all part of some broader scheme? By the time fall arrived, even the leads that seemed promising ended in dead ends. For every clue that pointed to something tangible, there were 5 more that muddied the waters further. A broken vase seemed staged. A bottle of whiskey found half empty at a crime scene felt intentional. The words "Don't trust your neighbor" scrawled on a piece of drywall in black marker set the entire community on edge, and yet it offered them no clear direction. Was the killer one of their own? "This wasn't supposed to happen here," a tearful woman had told reporters after the 4th family was discovered. "This isn't the kind of place you worry about locking your doors. This is home." Her sentiment struck a chord with many. The wholesome image of suburban Atlanta, a place where fences were more for decoration than security, was cracking under the weight of fear. Perhaps the most insidious part of it all was the killer's ability to blend in. No one had seen anything outright alarming. There were no dusty drifters lurking under street lamps, no sketchy vans rolling past playgrounds. Whoever had turned Atlanta's suburbs into their killing field walked among them, invisible. For law enforcement, these cases weren't just challenging, they were exhausting. The violence, the lack of witnesses, the seemingly endless misdirection. Each new crime scene was like an open wound, a sobering reminder of how fragile life and safety truly was. The Johnsons were only the beginning. And even as the bodies piled up, one truth became horrifyingly evident. This killer wasn't going to stop until they were caught, or until the last family in Atlanta, and beyond, was left shuddering behind locked doors. The first killer emerges. A mastermind or just the beginning? Detective Lee Carter sat under the artificial glow of fluorescent lighting in the incident response room. It wasn't particularly late, but the fatigue etched deep into his face suggested days without sleep. He sipped his lukewarm coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to quell the sour taste of frustration. It had been 3 months since the first murder of the Johnson family rocked the suburban community, and it felt like every lead had led them straight into a dead end, until now. An officer burst into the room, breathless but visibly jittery. "Detective Carter!" he managed to choke out. "We've got something big!" Carter immediately perked up, setting his mug down with a loud clink. "What is it, another crime scene?" The officer shook his head. "No, it's better. We found a busted bottle of whiskey at the Johnson crime scene. It matches another bottle that was abandoned behind a local liquor store off Cascade Drive. Surveillance footage from the store pulls up a guy who matches a possible suspect." Carter grabbed his jacket and strode out of the room before the officer could even finish. His rookie partner, Ashley Green, scrambled to keep up. "What are you thinking, Lee? Could this finally be it?" she asked, half out of breath. Carter didn't answer immediately, his steps quick and unwavering. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said. "But hell, I've been waiting for a break like this since the first damn body dropped." The suspect's image, pulled from grainy security camera footage, was unremarkable, so unassuming it was almost unnerving. A man in his mid to late 30s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, casually placing the bottle of whiskey on the counter as if he were running ordinary errands. Nothing about his demeanor screamed, "killer," but the timestamp on the footage placed him less than a mile from the Johnson house on the very night of their murders. Green stared at the screen, frowning. "This could be anyone." "Yeah," Carter muttered, leaning closer. "Or it could be the someone we've been chasing." Hours later, the suspect was identified as Brandon Mills, a drifter with an address that couldn't seem to stick for longer than a few months. He'd been bouncing from shelter to shelter across the state, but a deeper dive into his background set off even bigger alarms. A dishonorably discharged veteran with charges that ranged from assault to drug possession to petty theft. It wasn't exactly the resume of a stable citizen. "I don't like this," Green admitted as they took the cruiser down to East Point where Mills had last been spotted. "This guy could be a total dead end. I mean, sure, he's got a rap sheet, but does that make him capable of—" "Whatever the hell happened at the Johnson house, and don't forget, no forced entry." Carter kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Let me tell you something, Green. People don't wake up one morning and decide they're going to butcher an entire family. There's escalation, a pattern. You do what I've done long enough, and you learn one thing. It's not always the loud, flashy types you've got to worry about. Sometimes it's the guy who blends in so well you don't even blink when he walks past." It didn't take long to track Mills down. He was sitting on the curb outside a laundromat with a cigarette dangling from his lips, looking every bit like someone who belonged to the shadows of society. When the squad car pulled up, his first reaction wasn't fear, but indifference. "You're Brandon Mills?" Carter called out as he stepped out of the car, his tone firm and authoritative. Mills blew out a puff of smoke and glanced up lazily. "Depends on who's asking." "That'd be the Atlanta Police Department," Carter shot back, flashing his badge. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." A slow smile spread across Mills's face, one that didn't reach his dull, sunken eyes. "Well, looks like I've got nothing better to do." Back at the station, the initial questioning session was grueling. Mills didn't provide any straightforward answers, but he wasn't evasive either. He floated in this gray area of smug indifference that Carter found infuriating. "I didn't kill anyone," Mills said for what felt like the 1,000th time, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You think I've got time to go around breaking into people's houses? I can barely keep my own shit together." "And yet," Carter pressed, tossing a photo of the whiskey bottle onto the table between them, "you were spotted buying this exact brand the night the Johnsons were killed. Care to explain?" Mills leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his stubbly chin. "Since when is buying booze a crime? Look, man, I'd been crashing at Barney's place a few streets over, okay? Didn't touch nobody. And I don't know anything about no damn Johnsons." "Barney's place?" Green chimed in from her seat in the corner, her notebook open. "He runs the halfway house down in Cascade, right?" "Nailed it," Mills replied. a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "Check with him. He'll tell you." Sure enough, Barney did corroborate Mills's claim that he was at the halfway house that night. But Carter wasn't ready to let it go completely. There was something about Mills that didn't sit right with him. His alibi might have cleared him of being at the scene, but it didn't clear him of involvement altogether. As the days turned into weeks, leads began to dry up again. Mills faded into the background, a suspect no more significant than the other shaky names on their list. But one thing stuck with Carter, gnawing at him like a splinter lodged deep under the skin, the smirk on Mills' face as he left the station. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you?" Mills had said before walking out the door. "Good luck, detective. You're gonna need it." Carter didn't know at the time how prophetic those words would be. What would follow was an intricate web of clues that hinted at something far larger, far more sinister, than a single drifter operating on his own. The whiskey bottle, the cryptic notes left at crime scenes, and a chillingly coordinated series of killings all pointed to one horrifying truth. Mills might have just been the tip of the iceberg, a pawn in a much larger game orchestrated by someone, or something, far more dangerous. And as Carter found himself staring at yet another grisly crime scene in the months to come, the smirk of Brandon Mills haunted him. Was Mills a mastermind, a scapegoat, or just a key that unlocked something even darker hiding in Atlanta's shadows? Every family, a strange clue, intentional misdirection, or random chance. Detective Lee Carter adjusted his tie as he pushed open the door to the dimly lit evidence room. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning chemicals, a stark contrast to the chaos of the cases they were trying to solve. Officer Ashley Green followed him in, her arms cradling a box stacked with plastic evidence bags. The words, "Garcia Family Crime Scene #4" were scrawled in black marker on the side of the box. She set it down on the table with a heavy thud. "Another day, another mystery," Green muttered as she popped the box open. "And this one's got the weirdest clue so far." Carter raised an eyebrow but said nothing, focused on flipping through the case file for any morsel of insight he might have missed. "The cowboy hat," Green continued, holding up a bag containing a weathered, dusty hat with a bent brim. "Found it in their damn kitchen. A cowboy hat, Lee, at a Mexican immigrant family's house. You explain that." Carter rubbed his temples, exhaustion evident on his face. "It's not supposed to make sense, that's the point. These left-behind items, they're meant to confuse us, waste our time." "Yeah, but why a cowboy hat? Why not, I don't know, something logical?" Green paused, frowning. "This feels deliberate. Don't you think whoever this is wants us to overthink it?" Carter leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "If there's one thing I've learned in 20 years, it's that killers like this, they love playing games. Every damn clue might mean nothing. Or it might mean everything. We don't have the luxury of deciding which. We follow every lead." The two detectives scanned through the other crime scenes for patterns, but none of it added up. A smashed tennis racket in the den of the Johnson family, a Polaroid camera left on the porch of the Sanders home, a single red rose found in the Garcia family's living room, and now, the cowboy hat. "You know what bothers me the most?" Green said as she jotted down notes on a yellow legal pad. "There's no connection between these families, different ethnicities, different neighborhoods, different financial statuses. Hell, even their religions don't match. The only thing these victims seem to share is that they're dead." "That's what makes it so hard to nail down the motive," Carter replied, staring at the board plastered with maps, photos, and timelines. His voice carried the weight of frustration. "Whoever's doing this isn't working off traditional patterns. This isn't about revenge or jealousy or money. This person, or people, are picking families like they're plucking names out of a hat." He gestured toward the scattered photographs of the homes, each marked with a bright red X. "And then they leave these objects. It's like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. They want us to follow them, but to where?" Green tapped her pen against her pad, thinking. "What if it's random? You know, just junk they pick up on their way in or out. They're not clues, they're distractions." "But the rose," Carter pointed out. He picked up the crime scene photograph from the Garcia house and held it up between them. In the middle of the chaos, the broken dishes, the overturned furniture, lay a single, perfectly intact red rose on the coffee table. "That's not random, that's deliberate." Green studied the photo carefully. "Okay, fine, the rose feels deliberate, but what about the Polaroid camera? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Or the busted tennis racket? You seriously think this killer is some avant-garde art director leaving behind props?" Carter smirked faintly at her sarcasm. "I think," he said slowly, "that this killer is trying to manipulate us. Maybe it's all psychological. Get us to chase our tails while they keep killing. They continued poring over the evidence when Captain Ramirez poked his head into the room. You two get any breakthroughs yet? Or should I start calling Ghostbusters? We're still sorting through the circus act in these crime scenes, Carter replied dryly. You got news? Ramirez stepped fully into the room, a folder under his arm. Remember that whiskey bottle from the Johnson case? The same brand showed up at the Garcia house, only this time it's unopened. Found it sitting on a bookshelf. Carter narrowed his eyes. Same brand? Same year on the label? Yep, we're running prints now, but you know how that goes. Probably wiped clean. Ramirez dropped the folder onto the table. Something else for you to chew on, Sherlock. As Ramirez left, Green opened the folder and skimmed the new report. So, a whiskey link now? What? Is our killer a connoisseur with a grudge? Or they're trying to point us in that direction, Carter replied, grabbing the photos of the whiskey bottles. What if this is all building to something? These items, they might not mean anything on their own, but maybe together. They form a pattern, Green finished his sentence, her voice tinged with realization. God, do you think these are trophies? Or calling cards? Maybe both, Carter said grimly. But if they're communicating something, we haven't cracked the code yet. The detectives worked late into the night, trying to piece together the puzzle. Green rolled out a sheet of butcher paper and scrawled down every object found at the scenes in big block letters. Tennis racket, Polaroid camera, whiskey bottle, rose, cowboy hat. Beneath each, she listed the crime scene locations and dates, trying to find anything that fit. A pattern, a connection, anything. It's like trying to unscramble alphabet soup, Green muttered, tossing her pen onto the table. Carter stood over her shoulder, his arms crossed. The cowboy hat, Southern iconography. The whiskey, also pretty Southern. But that rose throws it all off. Unless the rose was meant for the Garcia family specifically, Green suggested. If the killer knew them. But you already ruled out any personal connection, right? Carter didn't respond, his eyes narrowing in thought. What if it's not about the victims? He said quietly, almost to himself. What if the clues are pointing at the killer instead, their background, their identity? You mean like their signature? Green frowned. That's a stretch, Carter. We'd need something stronger to back that up. Carter gestured at the growing list on the butcher paper. Think about it, every item. The tennis racket, the whiskey, the hat feels like parts of a story. What if they're leaving us pieces of themselves in every crime scene? Green stared at him, then back at the list. If that's true, what kind of story are they trying to tell us? As the night wore on, the team couldn't stop asking themselves one question. Were these bizarre clues leading them closer to the truth, or leading them further down a dark, twisted rabbit hole? The fourth family, an immigrant household, and the first turning point. The call came in at 6:42 a.m. on a frigid autumn morning, the kind where the crisp air clung to your lungs and the dead leaves crackled underfoot. Detective Lee Carter's phone buzzed on his nightstand and shattered the silence of his apartment. It's happened again! The voice of Captain Ramirez came through the line, heavy and strained. Carter didn't need any more details. The tone said it all. By 7:15 a.m., Carter was parking his unmarked Crown Victoria on a small cul-de-sac on the edge of southwest Atlanta. The house before him, squat and worn, was a far cry from the perfectly painted homes of the earlier victims. This one belonged to the Garcias, a family of 5 who had immigrated from Mexico a decade earlier for better opportunities. It wasn't the type of neighborhood where tragedies like this were supposed to happen, but crime showed no bias. The porch was lined with overgrown planter boxes, some spilling over with shriveled flowers, others filled only with dirt. Carter's boots crunched on loose gravel as he approached the scene, his rookie partner, Ashley Green, at his side. What do we know? Carter asked the first responding officer on the scene, a nervous-looking kid no older than 25 whose badge still shone like it was fresh out of the packaging. Family of 5, the officer gulped, his face pale. The neighbors said they didn't hear anything unusual last night. No screams, no commotion. Whatever this is, it was quick. Carter let out a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose as he prepared himself to walk into yet another vision of hell. The living room was small, cluttered, but undeniably homey. Family photos adorned every surface, the Garcias smiling in front of a snowy mountain, the kids holding sparklers in a post-4th of July haze. There were signs of life here, a warmth that now felt deeply wrong in the presence of the crimson-stained chaos. Blood splatters concentrated here, Green muttered, pointing toward the sofa. Looks like they were ambushed in the middle of the night. No sign of forced entry. "What about the back door?" Carter asked, stepping gingerly over a scattering of broken ceramic. An overturned family photo lay glass down on the floor, its frame splintered. "Locked, deadbolted," Green emphasized. "They either let someone in, or the killer had a way in we haven't found yet." The bodies were in different rooms. Mr. Garcia, a middle-aged man who worked 2 jobs as a landscaper and construction day laborer, was found slumped on the recliner, his neck torn open so violently that Carter had to look away for a moment. Mrs. Garcia was in the hallway, as if she had tried to run, her hands clutching futilely at her stomach wounds. In the kids' shared bedroom, 3 small forms lay unmoving beneath their brightly colored blankets. "Who kills kids like that?" Green whispered, her voice breaking as she stared at the inconceivably tiny shapes. "What kind of monster does this?" Carter remained silent, not because he didn't have an opinion, but because he couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. By the time the forensics team arrived on scene, Carter was already studying a peculiar detail left prominently on the coffee table in the living room: a single red rose, perfectly intact, lying on its side. Next to it was a crumpled scrap of paper with a message scribbled in crude handwriting: "El Diablo estaba aquí." The devil was here. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" Green asked, peering over Carter's shoulder. "This guy, whoever he is, he's theatrical," Carter replied grimly. "He wants us to see this and start spinning our wheels. The rose, though, I can't make sense of it. It's like something out of a Gothic novel or a Spanish telenovela," Green said, frowning as she carefully bagged the evidence. "And the note? The devil was here? He's messing with us." "I don't know," Carter muttered, clearly unsettled. "Maybe it means something specific to the family. Maybe it doesn't." Neighbors gathered outside the property, as news of another murder spread like wildfire down the block. None of them had much to offer at first, just variations of the same shocked statements. "They were good people," one elderly woman said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Hard-working, kept to themselves." "And they'd never leave their doors unlocked, if that's what y'all are thinking," another neighbor added resolutely. Mr. Garcia was real protective of his family. But as Carter canvassed the area, he got one peculiar lead: an older man in a ratty flannel shirt who happened to live across the street. "There was a car," he said, scratching his chin with fingers dirtied by years of working outside. "Parked too long. Too close to their house that night, you know?" "What kind of car?" Carter's attention snapped to life. "Old station wagon, I think. Blue or maybe gray. Didn't get the plate, just didn't look right. It wasn't theirs, I know that much." Carter nodded, his mind already running through possibilities. It wasn't much, but it was a lead, and in cases like this, even the smallest thread was worth pulling. By the time the detectives returned to the station that afternoon, news of the rose and the note had already spread. Half the room was buzzing with theories that the killer was some kind of religious fanatic, while the other half argued it was all just part of the sick mind games. "Maybe the rose relates to the name Garcia," one officer suggested, "like Rosa, a common Hispanic name." "That's a stretch," Green muttered to Carter as she rolled her eyes at the speculation. "Here's a thought," Carter said, his voice grim. "What if the rose isn't about them at all? What if it's about him, the killer? From the cowboy hat to the whiskey bottle to the rose, what if each item is a fingerprint, in its own sick way?" "They're all so different though," Green countered. "There's no connecting logic behind them. The cowboy hat made the Sanders case feel southern, the Polaroid felt random, and now the rose? What's next, a disco ball?" "Maybe," Carter said with a shrug, "but I can't shake the feeling the rose represents something bigger in this case. Some sort of turning point." "Why a turning point?" Carter's tired eyes locked on Green. "Because this wasn't just any family. Immigrants, vulnerable, outside the established suburban narrative. It's risky. It's different. Either they fucked up or they're escalating." Green froze as the reality of Carter's point sank in. The killer, or killers, were getting bolder. "And if they don't stop," Carter muttered, more to himself than to Green, "he's gonna leave a rose in every living room every damn week, until we catch him." This fourth case marked the shift in tone for the investigation. It wasn't just about Atlanta's suburban status quo anymore. The rose, the note, the brutality of targeting children, all of it pushed the investigation into darker, more unpredictable waters. The question of why only deepened as the bodies continued to pile up, each one leaving behind a darker and stranger piece of a twisted puzzle. The killer's clever plan. The first surviving witness. The Sanders house was quiet, almost too quiet, long before the police lights flooded the darkened suburban street. By the time detectives Carter and Green arrived, The front door was sagging on its hinges, a jagged reminder of the nightmare that had unfolded just hours earlier. "What do we know so far?" Carter asked, stepping out of his unmarked cruiser. His boots crunched on the gravel-lined driveway, his sharp gaze locked on the modest, two-story home. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about it, just another quintessential suburban house with neatly trimmed hedges and a porch swing that now swayed eerily without a sound. Green caught up to him, her notebook already open. Preliminary call came in around 3:30 a.m. from the neighbors. No screams, no gunshots. They just saw the door left wide open and thought it was odd. First responders found the parents dead in the living room. Looks like the same M.O., overkill. "Jesus," Carter muttered, his jaw tightening. "And the kids?" Here Green hesitated. "3 kids, 2 dead, but—" She paused, glancing back at the house as if to steady herself. "The youngest girl survived, somehow. She's 8 years old. We found her hiding in a bedroom closet." Carter's usual stoicism cracked, just for a moment. "A witness, after 5 damn families?" His eyes sharpened, the gears in his head already spinning. "That's not just a break in the case, that's a miracle." Inside, the living room was a war zone, coffee tables smashed, glass shattered. The mother, Rebecca Sanders, lay slumped on the couch, her arms lacerated as if she'd tried to fight off her attacker. The father, Peter Sanders, was just a few feet away, his body crumpled near the entertainment stand. Blood had pooled and dried in jagged trails, painting a picture of chaos that only confirmed what the detectives already knew. Whoever had done this enjoyed it. "Same signs," Green noted quietly, pointing to the jagged knife wounds on the father's torso. "It's not just murder, it's personal, rage-fueled." Carter hovered near her, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene before landing on an unusual object propped against the mantel above the fireplace. A child's toy, a plastic dinosaur with faded green paint, stood out in the carnage. "What the hell is this?" Carter muttered as he reached for it. Green glanced over and shrugged. "Could have been knocked over when it all went down. It's a kid's house, toys are everywhere." "No," Carter insisted, his brows furrowing. "Look at this place. The table's flipped, the furniture's wrecked, but that toy is standing upright, perfectly placed. It's deliberate. This thing wasn't left here by the kid." Green scribbled a note in her pad, her only answer a quiet, begrudging, "maybe." The upstairs hallway was eerily silent. Carter and Green made their way to the third door on the right, the closet where the youngest Sanders child had been found. The little girl, Emma, was sitting on the edge of her bed now, her face pale and tear-streaked. A female officer knelt at her side, holding her tiny hand. "She's scared out of her mind," the officer whispered to Carter as he approached. "You talked to her yet?" Carter asked, his voice quieter now, taking on an almost gentle tone that even Green wasn't used to hearing from him. "Not much," the officer replied. "She's in shock, but she did manage to tell us something. She heard them. She says she heard his voice." Carter stopped midway. His heart, hardened by 2 decades of grisly cases, gave a slight jolt. "She what?" "The guy didn't find her," the officer explained. "She said she hid in the closet as soon as she heard the door break. She's not clear on a lot, but she swears she heard his voice before he left." Carter turned to Green, the weight of this revelation clear on his face. "An actual description? Finally?" Green nodded, though she lacked his optimism. "It's something, but I wouldn't hold my breath here, Lee. We're dealing with a traumatized 8-year-old. Whatever she heard could be muddled." Carter let out a steadying breath, crouching down to Emma's level. "Hey there, Emma," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I'm Detective Carter. I know you've had a rough night, but I've got to ask you some important questions. Can you help me?" Emma's wide, glassy eyes didn't move from her lap, but she gave the faintest nod. "Okay," Carter said gently. "You said you heard a voice. Do you remember anything about it? Was it loud? Deep?" Emma took a shaky breath, her small voice barely above a whisper. "A man," she said. His voice was low, but calm. He didn't yell. "Calm?" Carter repeated, exchanging a curious look with Green. "What did he say?" Emma's hands trembled against the fabric of her dress. She clenched her fists tightly, her knuckles turning white. "He said—" Her breath hitched, and for a moment Carter feared she might shut down entirely, but then she continued. "He said, 'You deserve this.'" The room went cold. "What do you mean, Emma?" Green asked, her tone as non-threatening as she could muster. "Was he talking to your mom and dad, or to someone else?" Emma tightened further, pulling her knees to her chest. He sounded mad," she whispered. "Mad at Mom and Dad. Mad at everyone." Carter sat back on his heels, processing her words. They had been chasing this killer for months, trying to piece together motive, method, and madness. But this was new. For the first time, they had a potential glimpse into his emotions. "Did you see him?" Carter asked after a long pause. "Did you see his face?" Emma shook her head vigorously, fat tears rolling down her cheeks. "No, closet. I didn't come out. I didn't move." "That's good," Carter assured her, his voice steadying. He wasn't lying. Her hiding may have saved her life. "You did the right thing, Emma. You stayed safe." Later that evening, back at the precinct, Carter and Green reviewed Emma's words for the 100th time. "You deserve this," Green repeated, frustration dripping from her voice. "What does he mean by that?" Carter leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's the first real insight into this guy's head. That's what it means. He's not just killing for the thrill of it. There's anger here, something specific. He picks these families for a reason." "But what reason?" Green shot back. "None of the victims are connected. The Sander family isn't rich, powerful, or controversial. Why the hell would someone think they deserve to die?" Carter couldn't answer, but in the silence of his office he couldn't shake the haunting calm of the killer's reported voice. Someone who could kill so brutally but sound so eerily composed while doing it. It was worse than rage. It was cold, calculated hate. And now, for the first time, the killer had let someone close enough to hear him. The map leading to a killer network. The evidence lay scattered across the dusty, dim-lit investigation room like the fragments of a broken mirror. Coffee-stained files, crumpled maps, and pinboard photographs with hastily scribbled notes crowded every available surface. The air was thick with exhaustion, but for Detective Lee Carter and Officer Ashley Green, giving up wasn't part of their vocabulary. "The pattern doesn't sit right," Carter muttered, staring at the chaotic web of strings and tacks pinned to their investigation board. Half the board was dedicated to photos of the victims, families torn apart with horrific precision, while the other half attempted to link scattered pieces of evidence. The whiskey bottles, the cowboy hat, the Polaroid, the rose, it all hovered somewhere between scattershot madness and cold, calculated planning. "Are we chasing one killer, or an entire goddamn network?" Green asked, breaking the silence. She sounded drained, as though the weight of the question itself exhausted her. Carter swung his chair toward her. His eyes were sharp but bloodshot. "It would explain a lot if it's more than one," he said. "The timing, the logistics, the sheer audacity of it all, this level of coordination feels bigger." "Or," Green countered, folding her arms tightly, "we're chasing a mastermind who's that much smarter than us, pulling strings like a puppeteer." Carter squinted at her, then nodded slowly as though her words were worth filing away. "Could be. But here's what I don't like, Ashley. No lone wolf picks families this precisely random. Too deliberately chaotic." "Precisely random." Green let the phrase hang in the air. "God, I hate that. How can something be both?" Carter didn't answer. His tired eyes landed on the corner of the room where last night's key piece of evidence was almost forgotten in an evidence bag, a hand-drawn map. The map had been found in the crawlspace beneath the Sanders' backyard shed. It was wrinkled and water-stained, as if it had been stashed there for months, maybe years. Yet somehow, it felt like a fresh lead, a ticking clock in their hands. Carter unfolded it carefully, smoothing out its edges against the table. The lines on the yellowed paper were barely legible, but they formed what seemed to be crude representations of Atlanta's urban sprawl and surrounding suburbs. There were icons etched along the map in red ink, crosses here, circles there. Some icons were marked with numbers, while others were scratched out entirely. "What are we looking at?" Green asked, leaning closer. "You tell me," Carter replied. "Someone clearly thought it was important enough to hide this, but—" He trailed off, pointing at one particular red cross that had been darkened over so many times, the paper bled through. "Wait," Green interrupted, pulling out her notebook. She flipped rapidly through pages until she landed on her scribbled timeline of the murders. "That cross. Look, it lines up almost exactly with where the Garcia family lived, the fourth crime scene. And this circle," Carter muttered, tapping a small neighborhood near Buckhead. "That would be the Johnson family's house. First victims." Green frowned. "Someone mapped out the crime scenes?" "Not just the crime scenes," Carter said grimly, leaning back in his chair. "There are more markers here. Too many." It was true. For every victim they had tallied so far, there were at least 3 or 4 additional locations mapped out. Crosses scattered over rural stretches, circles marking residential suburbs, a handful of stars in what appeared to be industrial districts. "Holy shit," Green whispered. "Are we looking at future targets?" Captain Ramirez entered the room at that moment, his dark eyes narrowing as he took in their discovery. "You two planning to tell me what all the whispering is about? Or should I just wait for the movie adaptation of this case?" "This map," Green began, holding it up, "it was buried behind the Sanders shed. We think the crosses match up to the crime scene so far, but there are additional markings. Targets, maybe." Ramirez let out a low whistle. "A hit list?" "Could be," Carter replied, "but I have a gnawing feeling it's more than that. These aren't just random families being chosen, Captain. Someone's been planning this for a long time." "That crawl space," Ramirez said thoughtfully, crossing his arms across his broad chest. "You're saying Sanders was being watched for weeks, maybe months before the attack. Hell, maybe every family these bastards hit was being stalked." "Exactly," Carter said. "The question is by who? And why are these markers spread across the entire metro area? If it's just one killer, this scale is impossible. No way does one guy set this up alone." Green pointed to another part of the map, this time near an old set of train tracks outside the city limits. It was marked with a faint X. "Something about this location," she murmured. "I don't think it's another victim. What if it's a meeting place, or a hideout?" Carter's eyes lit up. "If there's a network, they'd need somewhere to plan, somewhere quiet, tucked away, out of sight. Like abandoned train tracks," Ramirez added, nodding in agreement. "Nice and isolated, the kind of place no one gives a second look." By the time the team decided to visit the train tracks, dusk had already fallen. The sky was a bruise of purples and grays, the chill of the oncoming night seeping into their bones. Carter and Green drove together in silence, their headlights casting long shadows as they followed the narrow, overgrown dirt path leading to the tracks. When they arrived, it only took seconds to see that they were onto something. Scattered around the rusted railway was evidence of life, old footprints frozen in the dirt, tire tracks leading to nowhere, and remnants of what appeared to be hastily abandoned belongings, cigarette butts, torn plastic bags, and a crumpled fast food wrapper. "You feel that?" Carter said softly, his voice cutting through the cold air. "What?" Green asked, craning her neck. "Feel what?" "The stillness," Carter replied. "When a place screams recently used, but whoever was here is long gone." As they scoured the area with flashlights, Carter's light landed on something lodged under the rails, partially buried beneath loose stones. He knelt to pick it up carefully, brushing away the dirt. It was a burner phone, its cheap black plastic body cracked but still intact. Green leaned in immediately. "If that phone still works, then we might have our first breadcrumb," Carter finished, "one that leads us straight to them." The map, the burner phone, the scattered belongings, each piece clicked into something larger and far more horrifying. What had once seemed like the work of a violent loner was now transforming into evidence of a complex operation, with layers of planning, coordination, and resources far beyond a single individual. For the first time, Carter felt the creeping weight of dread settle over him. This wasn't just a killer, this was a system, and they were only beginning to scratch the surface. The leader. A complicated past. Detective Lee Carter hated coincidences, or perhaps more accurately, he didn't believe in them. Sitting at a cluttered desk deep within the precinct, he stared at a name that had surfaced again and again in the last 48 hours of investigations. David Barnes. The name wasn't unfamiliar, and that was what worried him. "Can someone explain to me," Carter spoke, the frustration in his voice barely contained, "how this guy wasn't on our radar sooner?" Officer Ashley Green looked up from her own desk, holding a pile of files so thick they teetered dangerously in her hands. "Probably because he's good at being invisible. Look at this," she said, dropping the files onto Carter's desk with a dull thunk. "David Barnes, 42 years old, dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army 12 years ago. Domestic violence charges, several restraining orders from his ex-wife and kids, and a handful of aggravated assault cases. Somehow he managed to avoid jail time for all of it." "That's not luck," Carter muttered, flipping through the pages. His eyes darted across records of dismissed charges, settled lawsuits, and redacted military files. "That's someone who knows how to work the goddamn system," Green nodded, her jaw tightening, "or someone who's been protected by it." Barnes's military history was particularly disturbing. He had served during a tumultuous period overseas, leading a platoon during one of the most violent years in the Iraq War. By all accounts, he had been a competent soldier at first, decorated, respected, even admired by those under him. But something had changed. Psychological evaluations buried deep in his record painted a grim picture. PTSD, anger issues, violent outbursts that, according to one report, left a fellow soldier hospitalized after what was officially described as a training accident. Barnes had been dishonorably discharged after a court-martial revealed a pattern of insubordination and aggression. "This guy's a walking bomb," Carter said, tapping a photo of Barnes from his military days, a headshot of a clean-cut, stone-faced young man who looked eerily unremarkable. "And he's been ticking for over a decade." The deeper the detectives dug, the more unsettling the picture became. After his discharge, Barnes had returned to Georgia, where his life spiraled downward. His ex-wife, Jenna Barnes, had filed multiple reports of abuse, each more harrowing than the last, punching holes in walls, locking her out of the house with the kids inside, threatening phone calls that only stopped when she finally disappeared with their children one night, leaving no forwarding address. How the hell did she get away from him? Green wondered aloud, adjusting her reading glasses as she sifted through restraining order documentation. "She ran," Carter replied bluntly. "The system sure as hell didn't protect her. She probably saved herself. Someone like Barnes doesn't just let go." "Yeah, well, it gets worse," Green said, flipping to the final page of the report like it was the punchline to a bad joke. "Apparently, after she vanished, Barnes joined some kind of support group. Something for other veterans dealing with anger and displacement issues. Sounded good on paper." "Let me guess," Carter said, sitting back in his chair. "It wasn't." The group, vaguely named the Shadow Brotherhood, sounded innocuous at first, a grassroots effort for ex-military men looking for camaraderie and stability, but Green's report described something far darker. While it wasn't officially classified as a militia, many of its members had ties to various anti-government and survivalist factions. Meetings reportedly included tactical training sessions, speeches promoting self-reliance, and deep disdain for social systems that oppressed their kind. Veterans, working-class families, and real Americans, as one member had reportedly called them. And at the center of it all was Barnes. "This wasn't just a support group," Carter said, leaning forward as he pieced it together. "This was fertile ground for radicalization. Barnes didn't find a place to heal. He found a goddamn army." "What's more," Green added, her tone sharp, "it looks like he rose to some kind of unofficial leadership role. People liked the guy, respected him even, especially the angrier veterans, the ones who felt like the world owed them something." Carter clenched his fists. "Respect? They're calling someone like Barnes a leader? The guy's a powder keg. I don't care if he's ex-military or a damn rocket scientist, he's a walking menace." "You're not wrong," Green agreed. "It gets worse. Look at this." She handed him a printed transcript from a recorded conversation between a former member of the Shadow Brotherhood and an ATF informant. Carter scanned the page, his eyes narrowing at every line. "Barnes is something else, man. He talks about cleansing the rot. About taking the fight straight to the people who deserve it. He says society's full of leeches, that it's only a matter of time before the takers get what's coming to them." "You're saying he's planning something?" "I'm saying he's not planning it alone." Carter set the paper down, his fingers drumming against the desk. "Radical ideology, leadership skills, a chip on his shoulder the size of a goddamn boulder. Barnes didn't just wake up one morning and decide to start killing families. This is methodical, strategic." Green nodded, her expression grim. "It explains the level of coordination we've been seeing, the patterns, the weird evidence left behind. No way is he doing all of this alone." "It's a network," Carter concluded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The Shadow Brotherhood might be more than just a group of disgruntled vets. They're being weaponized. And Barnes, he's the one pulling the strings." But what troubled them most wasn't just Barnes's ideology. It was how effective he'd been at hiding in plain sight. Despite his record, his past, and the disturbing movement behind him, Barnes had managed to avoid detection for years. No arrests, no significant run-ins with the law, just a long trail of whispers and red flags that no one had been able to piece together until now. "How do you catch someone like that?" Green asked later that night, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Carter looked up from his notes, exhaustion carving lines into his face. "You don't," he said after a long pause. "Not unless they slip." The next morning a team was assembled to dig further into Barnes's recent movements and any known associates of the Shadow Brotherhood. As Carter stared at the giant caseboard, Barnes's photo now pinned dead center, he felt the weight of something far larger than he'd anticipated pressing down on him. This wasn't just about one man, it wasn't just about a series of grisly murders. This was the start of something bigger, something darker, and unless they could stop him, Barnes wouldn't just leave more bodies in his wake, he would inspire others to do the same. A nightmare unfolds at a small-town church. The call came in on Christmas Eve, the kind of call even hardened detectives like Lee Carter hate to answer. A massacre, not in some forgotten back alley or crime-ridden neighborhood, but in a place that should have been untouchable. A church. Detective Carter arrived at the scene just as the last fire truck was pulling away. Snowflakes clung to his jacket's shoulders, melting almost instantly as he approached the building. The small wooden church stood at the center of a quiet neighborhood. Holiday lights twinkled half-heartedly along the lampposts lining the street, a stark contrast to the scene inside. "Jesus Christ," Carter growled under his breath as his boots crunched over shards of broken stained glass at the church's front door. "Figures he'd be the only one who could have stopped this," Officer Ashley Green replied, stepping up beside him, her voice unusually shaky. She wasn't religious, not really, but even she couldn't help feeling a chill standing at the threshold of what should have been a safe haven. The two detectives ducked under the crime scene tape stretched across the entrance and stepped into a sight that would haunt them for years to come. The pews were overturned, some smashed into pieces. Blood streaked the worn wooden floorboards, pooling in grotesque shapes beneath the flickering glow of candlelight from the altar. The nativity scene near the pulpit had collapsed, with Mary and Joseph lying in splinters, while baby Jesus had been kicked halfway down the aisle, his porcelain face shattered. Bodies were everywhere. Families slumped over one another, mothers with their arms stretched out over their children, fathers frozen in agony where they had tried to shield their wives. 22 victims were counted by the time Carter and Green arrived, 4 families ripped apart mid-prayer. "Christmas Eve," Green whispered, her voice hollow. "They were here for the candlelight service. What kind of monster does this?" Carter didn't answer. He walked slowly down the aisle, careful not to step on the bodies of parishioners still clutching hymn books, as though their last act might have been singing. His stomach churned. He'd seen a lot in his career, but this was different. This was worse. "There's no respect here," he said finally, his voice low. "Not for life, not for faith, nothing." At the pulpit, Carter noticed something taped to the altar, a folded piece of paper, stark white against the dark mahogany. He reached for it, careful not to disrupt the other evidence being catalogued by the crime scene techs swarming the chapel. As he unfolded the paper, Green stepped up beside him, craning her neck to get a glimpse of the writing. The message was short, scrawled in thick black marker. "God doesn't live here anymore." Green let out a sharp breath, as though the words had physically struck her. "That's not just a taunt," she said. That's a statement. They've got some kind of message behind this." "They," Carter repeated. He handed the note off to one of the techs before turning back to his partner. "You think this is more than one person?" Green nodded slowly. "It has to be, Lee. Look at this place. Too many victims, too much destruction, and no one heard anything until it was over. Even if there was just one shooter, someone else had to be coordinating this." Carter gestured toward the large red X painted on the church's entrance, its bold lines dripping down onto the steps below. "So what is it? Are they making a point?" "They're marking something. Territory, ideology, who the hell knows?" Green shrugged, but didn't sound convinced by her own words. "But this one feels different from the other attacks. A church. It's high profile, risky. They wanted to send a message." Carter knelt beside a young boy, no older than 8, whose lifeless body lay slumped amidst shattered hymnals. His small hand clutched a toy car with chipped red paint, something he must have brought to keep himself entertained during the sermon. Carter's jaw tightened as he stood back up. "These people didn't deserve this!" Carter spat, echoing the killer's chilling words from the last case. "This wasn't justice. This wasn't some divine cause. This is just savagery." Across the room, Captain Ramirez stepped in from the cold, his heavy coat dusted with snow. His face was pale, drawn tight with a mixture of grief and fury. "Tell me you've got something, Carter." Carter straightened, brushing glass off his knees. "We've got bodies. We've got chaos. But so far, still nothing that leads us closer to the bastards who keep doing this." "Well, you're about to," Ramirez said curtly. "We've got a hit on the prince from the hymnals. And get this, it's a match to a known associate of David Barnes." Barnes, that name again. Carter's fists clenched at his sides. "So it's him! Barnes was here." "Not exactly," Ramirez corrected, holding up a printout. "The prince belonged to a man named Kevin Rourke, ex-military, dishonorably discharged just like Barnes. Same damn support group too, the Shadow Brotherhood." Green groaned. "So now we know it's not just Barnes. He's got people. A network." Carter glanced back at the altar, at the smeared blood and desecrated holy symbols. "And they're escalating. he said grimly. "The families before, I thought maybe we were dealing with personal vendettas, something targeted. But this isn't personal, this is a goddamn statement. And they're not done," Ramirez added. "We found tire tracks out back, bleeding into the woods. Looks like they came prepared to leave in a hurry." "What about witnesses?" Carter asked. "Anyone see anything? Vehicles, faces, anything?" Ramirez shook his head. "Negative. It's like they came out of nowhere and vanished just as fast. No cameras either. Church security system's ancient, and it's Christmas Eve in the middle of suburbia. Nobody was expecting this." Carter's mind raced as he tried to piece together the bigger picture. This wasn't about families anymore. It wasn't about random suburban homes turned into slaughterhouses. This was about fear, about sending a message larger than life itself. "They're going public," Carter said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "The quiet killings weren't enough anymore. Mark my words, Ashley, whatever this is, it's just beginning." Green exchanged a worried glance with him. "If they're moving up the chain like this, it's only a matter of time before they hit somewhere worse." Somewhere worse. As if a goddamn bloodbath in a church wasn't already the worst imaginable nightmare. Green hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Barnes was here, or is he just pulling strings?" Carter didn't respond right away. He stared at the overturned pews, the bloody hymnals, and the shattered nativity scene. Then, finally, he said, "Barnes doesn't need to be here, Ashley. He's got enough people who believe in whatever sick vision he's selling, but mark my words, this has his signature all over it." As the detective stepped back into the biting cold, Carter couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at the back of his mind. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't just chaos for the fun of it. This was war. And the enemy? They weren't just shadows anymore. They were everywhere. The escape route, a masterpiece of deception. Officer Ashley Green smacked a fresh map onto the large metal table in the investigation room, the creases still sharp from where it had been hastily unfolded. "All right," she started, exhaling sharply as she smoothed it with her hands. "Let's reevaluate this mess because frankly I don't know if we're chasing ghosts or geniuses anymore." Detective Lee Carter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his eyebrows furrowed as his dark eyes scanned the map. The locations of the murders were marked in thick red circles, each encircled with notations scrawled in Green's fast handwriting. It looked chaotic at first glance, a dartboard of suburban cul-de-sacs and back roads. But Carter knew better. This wasn't chaos. "This bastard planned it all," Carter muttered, circling a neighborhood with his index finger. Green raised an eyebrow as she dropped a stack of papers to her side. "You really think so?" Carter sighed, leaning forward and dragging his finger along the roads drawn on the map. "This isn't just about hitting random houses or picking defenseless families at will. Look here, the murders, all 6 so far, are connected through their geography. Every single one happens within a 20-minute drive of a major train line." "A train line?" Green echoed, stepping closer to the map. Her skepticism softened as she examined his markings, her head tilting slightly as the pieces clicked together. She grabbed a yellow highlighter and began shading over the routes Carter had pointed at. Sure enough, highlighted paths connected every major crime scene to the tracks. Carter nodded grimly. And that's not a coincidence. It hadn't taken long after the Sanders case for their investigators to notice something unusual: stolen vehicles. At first, it had been a minor, almost forgettable part of the evidence. One SUV missing from a garage, another car jacked from a parking lot. Subjects' plates were spotted near the crime scenes only to be scrubbed from police reports hours later when the same vehicles suddenly turned up abandoned miles away. But last week's discovery added an even darker layer to the puzzle. "A one-way train ticket to Miami," Green said, grabbing the fresh note from her file. "It was found abandoned in a stolen Ford parked 3 blocks away from the Garcia's house. We thought it was just another piece of junk, but it's clever, really. It throws off suspicion. It throws us off, Lee." "Intentional," Carter replied flatly. "They're smarter than we gave them credit for. They're building false trails." Carter had pondered the strategy late into the night as the other detectives filed out of the precinct one by one. From the perch at his cluttered desk, he tried to imagine the killer's mindset, the meticulous steps, the calm, methodical movements, the ability to vanish over and over without so much as a blip on the nearest security cameras. "They're not just running," Carter said aloud to himself, breaking the silence of the squad room. "They're making us look the other way." Green had stayed behind, per usual, perched at her own desk with an overfull coffee mug practically glued to her hand. "Making us look the other way?" She glanced up from the forensic report she was scanning. Carter leveraged off his seat and slowly walked over to the evidence wall they had built over the past few months. each block spilling over with details from the murders. "Think about it," he said, gesturing at the connected red string. "We get a call. We show up at some bloodbath of a scene. We start digging through forensics, following leads." He spun to face her, his lips tight with frustration. "And then they leave a stolen car 3 counties over, or they drop this goddamn ticket hinting they're fleeing to Florida. It keeps us busy." Green dropped the coffee back onto her desk, catching on. "They bait us into chasing the wrong leads." "Exactly," Carter said. "But they're not actually heading to Miami. Hell, they probably aren't heading anywhere. They're buying themselves time while they disappear in some other direction entirely." Back on the map, Carter began overlaying a new series of yellow X's along the routes Green had highlighted. "Every vehicle abandoned along the train lines." Carter paused, tapping his chin. "It's like they want us to think they're dedicated to the tracks. That's the pattern." "Or the illusion of a pattern," Green interrupted. She leaned her shoulder against the table, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly as the realization hit her as well. "God, they're good. Whoever the hell Barnes is coordinating with, they've got their logistics down pat." Carter's finger hovered over the shaded railways. "Wait, what if they're not just dumping cars by the tracks? What if they're using them?" Green's head snapped toward him. "Wait, are you saying—" "Think about it." His voice quickened. "Public trains, cargo freight, hell, even abandoned routes. These people could have been riding these railways to spread out, covering miles at a time. Barnes doesn't need some shared safe house or meetup point. He's got an underground highway in plain sight." Hours later, the detectives stood by the rusting remains of a nearly overgrown railway yard just outside of Atlanta. The weeds stretched tall, clinging to the abandoned freight cars that creaked uneasily in the evening wind. The tracks themselves were cracked and broken in places, but they still wound in smooth, uninterrupted lines extending in both directions. "Feels too empty," Green muttered as she swept her flashlight along the tracks. Carter ignored the chill creeping up his spine. He crouched beside the rails, tilting his flashlight downward, where a recent scattering of footprints crisscrossed the dirt. "Someone was here." Carter gestured to Green as his beam caught the faint outline of tire tracks just a few feet away. "Recently." "I hate this," Green muttered, stepping closer. "As you should," Carter replied, "because this isn't just a meetup spot, it's their hub." Just then, Green's flashlight caught a plastic object lodged beside a nearby stack of crates. She froze. "Carter, burner phone, over here." The train yard discovery was a turning point, but not the kind they had hoped for. As phones were scrubbed for data and leads were filtered into dead ends, Carter and Green were forced to accept a grim possibility. "They're always a step ahead," Green said bitterly over a late-night coffee run days later. "They're being led," Carter replied firmly, "and Barnes is the damn conductor." Green raised her mug in mock salute. "So tell me, fearless leader, how do you stop a ghost who knows every route out of town?" "You don't track them," Carter said darkly, slumping deeper into his seat. "You wait for them to get cocky." Carter knew their tangled web of deception wasn't over. Long after the crimes were dealt with, their elaborate escape routes would tell a chilling story of coordination, planning, and premeditated misdirection. Smooth exits, false trails, invisible networks. It all came down to one brutal truth. Barnes and his group weren't just killers, they were strategists, and Carter knew damn well they weren't done. Facing the mastermind, a complex manhunt. 6 months into the nationwide investigation, Detective Lee Carter was already restless. Calls had come in at odd hours. Tips claimed to have spotted David Barnes in nearly every state between Georgia and Louisiana, and every single viable lead had seemed to disintegrate into thin air. If Barnes wasn't a ghost before, he had become one now. It wasn't until a piece of forensic analysis tied a burner phone found at the abandoned railway yard back to a single encrypted number that Carter finally caught his break. For months, Barnes had been lying low, careful not to leave a trail, or so he thought. However, a small mistake led investigators to a crumbling house deep in the Bywater neighborhood of New Orleans. "Lee, you ready for this?" Captain Ramirez asked, gripping the dashboard as their black SUV sped down the dark, uneven streets of New Orleans. Carter didn't answer immediately. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his expression a mix of determination and unease. "I'll believe it's him when we've got him standing in cuffs," he said. "Until then, I'm not ready. Not for someone like Barnes." Green, sitting in the back seat, adjusted the strap on her bulletproof vest. "You really think this is it? The house?" she asked, her voice almost hesitant. Barnes had wriggled out of every net they'd thrown at him, and Green didn't want this lead to add to the pile of disappointments. "It's him!" Carter growled, his conviction like a blade sharpening in his chest. He made a mistake. Everyone does eventually. Barnes is smart, but smart doesn't mean flawless. Ramirez tilted his head to peer out the window as they passed rows of peeling pastel homes, shabby carports and narrow alleyways shimmering under the faint glow of street lamps. "Bet he knows we're close. A guy like him doesn't sit still for long." "No, Captain," Carter replied. "A guy like him doesn't sit still unless he wants to." They reached the house just after midnight. The structure sagged under its own weight, with boarded windows and thick twisting vines choking what might have once passed for a porch. Piles of rotting wood and garbage surrounded the property, giving it the appearance of being long abandoned. But Carter had seen enough hiding spots in his career to know better. "This is definitely his style," Green murmured, stepping out of the SUV and eyeing the eerie stillness of the block. "Shitty house, middle of nowhere, but close enough to blend. He knows nobody's paying attention to the run-down spots." Inside the van that followed them, the SWAT team was prepping their gear. Carter approached the squad leader, a grizzled and imposing man named Boyd, and gave him a brief rundown. "Simple. We go in quiet, keep tight angles, clear the house top to bottom. If Barnes is inside, he's not slipping away again. Understood?" Boyd raised an eyebrow. "This the paranoid vet you've been chasing for months?" "The one," Carter confirmed bluntly. Boyd smirked, but it was humorless. "Anyone can break, Detective." "That's the plan," Carter muttered under his breath, his hand reflexively brushing the holster at his hip. The team breached the door at exactly 12:43 a.m. The burst of movement shattered the night with a deafening crack, and within seconds the SWAT team stormed the hallway, rifles raised, boots thundering against the warped wood floor. The house was sparse, almost intentionally so, a single couch stripped of stuffing, discarded clothes piled in the corners, and a faint foul smell lingering like gasoline and mildew. Carter hung back near Green as the team cleared the first floor. Boyd had already yelled "clear" 3 times, but Carter's gut told him something was off. Barnes had been careful for too long to leave himself this exposed. "You feel that?" Carter whispered. Green looked at him, puzzled. "Feel what?" "Too easy," Carter muttered, his eyes scanning the living room. "There's no resistance, no backup plan. This doesn't feel like Barnes's style." Upstairs, Boyd's voice broke through the comms with a sharp edge. "We've got something!" Carter bolted up the creaking staircase, Green close behind. Boyd stood over a door partially ajar at the far end of the upstairs hall. He motioned to Carter and Green, letting them lead the charge this time. Inside was a horrifying development. The bedroom was rigged with explosives. "Jesus Christ!" Green hissed, stepping quickly back into the hall. "Tripwires on every window. He knew we'd come." "No," Carter said, his eyes flitting across the room to the device in the center, a mess of blinking lights and wires surrounding a small black box. His stomach sank in realization. "It's not meant to kill us. He's covering his tracks." Before Carter could finish speaking, the entire house erupted. The explosion tore through the night like a thunderclap, sending debris and fire cascading into the quiet neighborhood. Carter had barely managed to push Green out of the way of the blast when he felt himself thrown backward down the stairs. The roar of the explosion gave way to a deafening buzz in his ears as he struggled to pull himself up. Outside, Captain Ramirez and SWAT scrambled to pull officers to safety as pieces of the house rained down like ash and bone. "Lee! Lee!" came Green's frantic voice. She stumbled over to him, coughing through the thick smoke. "What the hell just happened?" Carter wheezed, his head pounding. He knew we were coming. That wasn't just a booby trap. Barnes wanted this house gone." "But why?" Green demanded, her voice cracking with frustration. Carter's mind worked through the haze as he surveyed the burning wreckage. "He's not running anymore," he said finally, his voice low and grim. "He's making a statement." Half an hour later, Carter sat perched on the back of an ambulance, his face dirty and his ears still ringing. Captain Ramirez stepped over, shaking his head. "No sign of Barnes. We're combing the blocks nearby, but if he's gone, he's gone." "He's not gone," Carter replied bitterly, staring blankly into the distance. "Not completely. He wants us to know he's still out there. And this?" He gestured toward the ruined house with a grim expression. "This was his way of telling us we haven't even begun to see what he's capable of." "Do you think he's trying to lead us somewhere else again?" Ramirez asked. "No," Carter whispered. "This isn't a distraction. Barnes is transitioning out of defense mode. He's planning something bigger." By dawn, every station and federal office from Louisiana to Georgia had Barnes's face plastered across their boards. More signs of a coordinated network began to surface, caches of weapons, burner phones routed through encrypted systems, and even evidence of bank accounts tied to suspicious transactions. Despite losing the house, Barnes's calculated destruction of evidence confirmed one horrifying truth. He had slipped through their fingers again. But this time Carter could feel it. They weren't chasing just one man anymore. They were chasing a movement, a storm brewing just beyond their reach. "Next time," Green said, nursing a half-empty cup of cold coffee, her voice sharp with resolve. "Next time we need to take him alive." Carter looked at her with tired eyes. "Alive?" He shook his head, his voice dark and honest. "Next time, Ashley, I don't think Barnes is walking out alive. He's not the kind of man who'll let that happen." Closing the murder spree, rounding up the remaining culprits. The conference room buzzed with an electric tension that had been simmering for months. Maps, photos, and data overflowed every surface, and the task force team huddled around a large screen glowing with tactical details. Detective Lee Carter stood at the front of the room, one eye on the screen and the other on the team. "This is it," Carter started, his voice steady but charged with determination. He pointed at the grainy surveillance feed frozen in place on the screen, a blurred shot of 4 men standing outside a rundown warehouse. "We've tracked them here, South Haven Industrial Park, just outside Birmingham, 6 suspects left, all confirmed members of Barnes's network. This is our chance to shut them down." At his side, Officer Ashley Green flipped through a thick file, her finger tapping one of the many mugshots inside. "We're looking at trained ex-military. These aren't amateurs," she said, addressing the room. "Every one of them has ties to Barnes and the Shadow Brotherhood. They're not just killers, they're operators." "I don't want to hear excuses," Captain Ramirez interjected firmly from the back of the room. "We've tracked these bastards across 6 states and we're finally catching up. Let's make sure they don't slip through our fingers like Barnes." Carter locked eyes with Ramirez. "They won't." Hours later, the task force convoy moved silently through the outskirts of Birmingham as dusk fell over the industrial park. The streets were eerily quiet, lined with rusting fences and sagging warehouses that hadn't seen proper use in years. Green sat shotgun beside Carter, her fingers drumming nervously against her leg. "You think they're holed up?" she asked, breaking the silence. "They have nowhere else to go," Carter replied without taking his eyes off the road. "Barnes may be the mastermind, but without him, these men are cornered, and cornered men make mistakes." "Yeah," Green muttered, staring out at the looming warehouses. "Or they dig in deeper." The warehouse in question was a dilapidated 2-story structure with boarded windows and a sagging roofline. The kind of place no one would give a second thought to, unless they were looking for it. Outside, the task force quietly deployed, moving into formation under the cover of darkness. SWAT leader Boyd knelt beside Carter as they studied the building through binoculars. "No movement outside," Boyd said, his voice low. "But I guarantee they're in there. You don't abandon vehicles like that." He pointed to 3 battered pickup trucks parked haphazardly by the side of the building. "Unless you're planning to hold your ground." Carter nodded sharply. "Then we go in hard. Full breach. These men know how to wait, how to ambush. We can't give them time to dig their claws in." The breach started at exactly 9:03 p.m. The first explosion came from the south entrance, where breaching charges blew the steel doors clean off their rusted hinges. SWAT moved in first, their rifles up, scanning every corridor as they cleared room after room. The entire building seemed to breathe unease. Long, empty corridors echoing with every bootstep, crates stacked like makeshift barricades, and the distant hum of machinery masking the silence. Carter and Green followed close behind the front line, scanning for anything the team might have missed. "Clear!" Boyd's voice echoed from the first-floor corridor. "Clear!" another officer called from the west wing. "Don't trust it," Green whispered to Carter. "These guys wouldn't make it this far without having a backup plan." As if on cue, gunfire erupted from the north end of the warehouse, a rapid staccato burst that tore through the quiet. "Contact! North corridor!" Boyd's voice barked through the radio, followed by more gunfire. Carter and Green sprinted toward the commotion, their footsteps pounding against the concrete. As they rounded the corner, they saw SWAT pinned behind a makeshift barricade of crates and old machinery, bullets ricocheting off the walls. "They're dug in!" Boyd called out, motioning for cover. "3 shooters minimum! They've got the high ground!" Carter scanned the corridor quickly, his mind racing. The culprits had barricaded themselves on the upper catwalk, a position that offered them clear sightlines and cover. But Carter noticed something else, an old staircase tucked in the shadows at the far end of the room. "Flank them," Carter said to Green, tapping her shoulder. "I'll draw their fire. You and SWAT move in from the side." "Lee," Green started to protest, but Carter cut her off. "Do it." Carter stepped out from cover, firing off calculated shots at the catwalk. The gunmen immediately zeroed in, their bullets tearing through the air as Carter dove for another position. The distraction gave Green and SWAT just enough time to move in. As Green and her team climbed the stairs silently, the chaos below masked their approach. She positioned herself at the edge of the catwalk, signaling the others to hold. And then, with practiced precision, she stepped forward, shouting, "Drop your weapons!" The gunmen froze for half a second, just long enough for SWAT to storm the platform, forcing them to the ground. By the time the dust settled, 3 suspects were in custody, their weapons confiscated, and their faces bloodied. Carter glanced over at Green as he caught his breath. "Good timing," he muttered. "Good distraction," she shot back with a faint smirk. But they weren't done. Further into the warehouse, 4 more suspects were pinned in what looked like a crude operations room. Maps and blueprints lined the walls alongside photographs of their previous victims, a chilling reminder of the chaos they had sown. Carter felt a surge of anger at the sight but forced it down. "Hands where I can see them!" Ramirez barked as SWAT surrounded the room. One by one the men surrendered, all but one, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a defiant sneer. "You think this ends with us?" The man spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think Barnes is finished?" Carter stepped forward, his voice cold. "Barnes is done, and so are you." The man smirked, leaning back against the wall as if the cuffs on his wrists didn't matter. "You don't have a clue what's coming." By 2 a.m. the warehouse was cleared and all 6 remaining suspects were in custody. As Carter and Green stood outside watching the last of the men loaded into transport vans, Green let out a slow exhale. "That's it," she said, almost like she didn't believe it. "We got them." Carter shook his head. "Not all of them." "Lee," Green said, turning to him. "This breaks the network. Without these men, Barnes has no one left to pull strings for him." "Maybe," Carter replied, his gaze distant, "but men like Barnes don't stop. Not until they're buried." Across the country, news broke the next morning of the arrests, of a nationwide murder spree finally brought to its knees. For the families of the victims, it was bittersweet closure. Justice had been served, but the scars of what had been lost would never fully heal. And for Carter, the weight of it all lingered. Barnes was still out there somewhere, and the storm he'd started hadn't yet passed. The historic trial and lessons from the shadows. The courtroom was packed. You could feel the tension in the air like an electrical storm moments before it hits. Rows of reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, pens scribbling furiously every time a lawyer so much as adjusted their tie. Behind them, the public gallery was filled with victims' families, law enforcement officers, and everyday people who had come to witness what the media was calling the trial of the decade. Detective Lee Carter sat quietly in the back corner of the courtroom, his usual stoic expression betraying just a flicker of unease. Officer Ashley Green was beside him, twisting her fingers around a pen, her restlessness a physical presence. "This doesn't feel real," Green muttered under her breath. "It never does," Carter replied, his voice low and gravelly. "Not until the gavel drops." At the defense table sat David Barnes, his hands shackled in front of him, his sharp, calculating eyes scanning the room. Dressed in a cheap suit provided by the state, Barnes looked starkly different from the dominant figure the task force had been chasing for over a year. The man who had led a nationwide slaughter, who had manipulated and mobilized others into carrying out unspeakable acts, now appeared almost ordinary. But Carter knew better. Underneath that neutral facade was a cold, methodical mind, one that had eluded them for far longer than they cared to admit. "Doesn't even flinch," Green whispered, glaring at Barnes. "He's sitting there like this is some goddamned game." "It's all a game to him," Carter replied, "and right now he thinks he's winning. He gets his time in the spotlight. He gets to act like he's smarter than everyone else in this room. But this time," Green added, her gaze hardening, "he doesn't walk away." The trial itself was a legal marathon, stretching on for nearly 8 months. Prosecutors meticulously constructed their case, pulling in experts in domestic terrorism, psychological profiling, and military ethics. Witnesses ranged from forensics teams to traumatized survivors, each painting a picture of a man who wasn't just a killer, but a calculating manipulator with a twisted ideology. "This isn't about one man," the lead prosecutor declared during his opening statement. His voice carried through the silent courtroom, heavy with the gravity of what he was about to say. "This is about a system of hate, fueled by fear, carried out by an organized network of individuals who believed they were untouchable. David Barnes didn't just commit crimes, he inspired them. He built a machine that left devastation in its wake. Barnes leaned back in his chair as the prosecutor spoke, his face unreadable. At no point did he look ashamed, regretful, or even remotely affected by the details presented against him. But Carter noticed something in the man's demeanor, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips whenever a particularly gruesome photo or video clip was shown in court. He wasn't reliving his crimes with horror, he was reveling in them. Survivors took the stand, their voices shaky but resolute. "I woke up to the sound of glass breaking," one mother recounted, tears streaming down her face. She sat gripping the edges of the witness stand as if physically anchoring herself to the moment. "My husband told me to hide with the children, but by the time I got to their room..." She stopped, struggling to find the words. The room was dead silent except for the faint clicking of reporters typing into their laptops. She finally managed to continue. "They were already gone, and the man I saw..." She pointed at Barnes, her hand trembling. "I'll never forget his face or the way he said, 'This is how the world works now.'" Green's grip tightened on her pen so hard it nearly snapped. Over the weeks, hundreds of pieces of evidence were brought forward. Crime scene photographs, texts, and encrypted emails recovered from seized burner phones, financial transactions linking Barnes to the industrial warehouses where his network operated. But the most damning evidence of all was a video. Played on a massive screen in the courtroom, the footage showed Barnes addressing a group of his followers, his voice calm but dripping with venom. "They've taken from us for too long," Barnes said in the clip, pacing in front of a poorly lit room filled with nodding men. Some were armed, others wore military fatigues. "They live in their pretty houses with their fences and their barbecue grills, while we scrape by like dogs. It's time they learn what it feels like to lose, to fear, because we are the ones who will survive this country's collapse. They're the leeches, and we'll bleed them dry." The prosecutor paused the video and turned to the jury. David Barnes isn't just a criminal. He's a dangerous ideologue who manipulated vulnerable men into carrying out a hateful vision of the world. And it's time to hold him accountable. The defense tried to minimize Barnes's role, claiming he was merely a spokesman for a group of like-minded individuals, rather than the mastermind prosecutors painted him to be. But the evidence, and the sheer complexity of the organization Barnes had built, was undeniable. Even as the defense attempted to portray him as a product of his PTSD and military trauma, the weight of his actions crushed any sympathy the jury might have felt. Carter and Green attended as many days of the trial as their schedules allowed. Each time they entered the courtroom they were met with the same sight, rows of grieving families, their faces etched with pain. For them, this wasn't about Barnes's psychology or ideology. It was about the husbands, wives, and children ripped from their lives forever by his actions. "You know," Green said during a lunch break after a particularly brutal day of testimony, "even if we win, even if he gets the death penalty, those families don't get to win. None of them get their lives back." "I know," Carter replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But it's not about winning. It's about making sure men like Barnes pay for what they've done. If we let him walk, even for a second, it sends the message that monsters like him can get away with it." When the verdict finally came down, after 4 grueling days of jury deliberations, the courtroom was silent with anticipation. On the count of murder in the first degree, guilty. On the count of domestic terrorism, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit mass murder, guilty. The list of charges went on for several minutes, each one met with growing relief from the gallery. By the end, Barnes showed no reaction. He sat motionless, as if the verdict had been inevitable in his mind. The death penalty phase was swift. Barnes received the ultimate punishment, but Carter knew better than to call it closure. In the aftermath, the country grappled with the dark truths the trial unearthed. How a man like Barnes could exploit anger, fear, and disenfranchisement to build something as destructive as the Shadow Brotherhood. How systems meant to prevent such extremism had failed again and again to catch him before it was too late. Cities across the nation held vigils for the victims, candles glowing beneath photos of innocent lives lost. A memorial was erected on the outskirts of Atlanta, where it all began, inscribed with the words, "We remember, so the darkness doesn't return." For Carter and Green, the case was over, but the scars lingered. "Do you think it's enough?" Green asked one night as they drove away from the precinct, the trial officially closed. "It'll never be enough," Carter replied, staring out the window. "But it's a start."